Greetings from the Asian Productivity Organization Secretariat. Welcome to all viewers to this APO's Productivity Talk, a series of discussion on the topics related to productivity. We are now broadcasting this event live from Tokyo. Today, our topic of discussion will revolve around various measures and public policy supports to address the development of small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. Examples of success stories, both at the policy level, at firm level productivity enhancement, will also be the highlight of our talks today. A particular reference will be made to the cases of Pakistan, where there are currently a quite number of initiatives being carried out in enhancing productivity in SMEs. So the topic on SMEs is again being presented due to the fact that they are important contributors to not only employment, but also inclusive economic growth in almost all economies. To discuss about this subject, we are joined today by Nadia J. She is currently the head of the Policy and Planning Division of Small and Medium Enterprises Development Authority, SMEDA, Government of Pakistan. Her work primarily involves facilitating, undertaking policymaking, as well as providing overall planning, programming, research, and evaluation of matters relating to SMEs. She was also part of the team in the development of the first Pakistan's SME policy. It was in 2007. She is now currently leading the exercise for the revision of the SMEs policy in Pakistan. So before Nadia start with her sharing, I would like to inform all viewers that today's session will be interactive. So I'm inviting the viewers to leave comments and questions in the live chat below. Nadia, you may please start with your sharing.
Thank you, Sonny. While I put up the presentation on the screen, I'd first of all like to thank the APO Secretariat for giving Pakistan the opportunity to share its SME development experience. So when we started talking with the APO Secretariat on what I would be focusing on my talk and why focus on Pakistan, it got me thinking as to what is the importance of this country and what are the key features and strengths of this country. When it just hit me right there, it was right there in front of me, that we are a country, the fifth largest country in terms of our population. We're 220 million people, consumers and producers. That's where our strength is. A youth bulge of over 63% of our people are in the working age cohort. That means we have a very young population. When it comes to digitization, we are about 167 million cellular phone consumers. That's a tele-density of about 78.84%. Whether you're talking about services, whether you're talking about trade, whether you're talking about agriculture, Pakistan has it all. So I thought that I'd begin by sharing some of the work that the government of Pakistan has been doing for SME development in the country. To walk you through the presentation, the way that I have structured it, I'll be sharing this with you, is why focus on SMEs overall. So why is it that globally SMEs are very important and they attract the attention of governments in terms of providing them support and different services? There are certain challenges that are addressed, and how are those challenges addressed globally? And then in the context of Pakistan, how and what kind of a contribution do SMEs provide to the economy? What kind of support policies have been put in place? So I will be also sharing some of the success stories and some of the current work that the government of Pakistan is doing for SME development. Now, when we talk of the MSME sector, we all know that in terms of the number of firms, over 90% of firms around the globe are categorized as SMEs. That's a large number. That's the entire economy, the global economy of the world, if you look at it that way. They contribute an estimated 50% to GDP and have an employment share of over 70% around the world. And just to substantiate this, these statistics highlight the importance of micro, small, and medium enterprises to global economy. And just to share with you, whether we are talking about a developed country or a developing country, you can see the number. I thought that it'd be a good idea to share the total number of employment, the contribution of GDP, and the contribution to net exports by the SME sector. And if you look right there, whether it's a developed country like Japan, there the employment contribution is about 70%, and contribution to GDP is 50%, and contribution to exports is over 50%. When you look at a developing country, again, in the case of Pakistan, and I'll be sharing these statistics later on in my presentation as well, they contribute an estimated 70% to employment, about 40% to GDP, and about 25% to exports. So whether we are talking about a developed country or developing country, SMEs are instrumental and they are the backbone of any economy, irrespective of the level of development of that particular country. Now, while they're very important, there are a number of challenges that these SMEs face. And these challenges range right from the fact that they are certain policy and regulatory challenges that they have to face when they come in contact with government. So the government interface, the government SME interface is a challenge in terms of the time and cost of compliance to certain regulations, licensing requirements. Access to finance is often cited as one of the binding constraints to SME development. So when we talk of access to finance, there are issues both at the demand and supply side of the SME sector. There are collateral issues, interest rate is cited as a challenge. So is on the banking side, on the commercial lending side, the evaluation and the risk mitigation mechanisms put in place is another issue. In case there are no risk mitigation mechanisms, commercial lending institutions find it rather difficult to assess the risk that they'd be taking with an exposure to the SME sector. Coming to the business development services, that's yet again another challenge for the SMEs because they organically grow. So when we go to the small towns, when we look at the entire landscape of countries, whether in the rural areas or urban areas, these are small shops, these are small businesses, these are small manufacturing concerns that earn their livelihood through doing business. So there is no technical support provided to them. There is no proper business management support that is available to them, and that is a challenge to their growth. Human resource, when we talk about the human resource development aspect, there's a supply and demand mismatch around the world in terms of the kind of skill set that is required for employment in an SME and for entrepreneurship, for somebody to start doing a business as well. In terms of technology, SMEs operate at low levels of technology because the cost of higher technology is far higher than what an SME can essentially afford. Marketing and market access is another challenge, and so is the availability of infrastructure in terms of testing, certification, quality control mechanisms around the world. Now, the challenges are there, but then again, we have seen that the contribution in developed countries over time has increased from the SME sector. So in order to address these challenges, an integrated approach has to be adopted for supporting MSMEs around the country. So when we're talking about designing or framing a policy, the objective of the policy has to be very clear. There is an overarching goal. There are certain macro objectives that have to be met. And then there are specific goals that I'm sharing with you right now, you can see on your screen. So when we're talking about the macro objectives, the goal of any government or any support measure is to provide employment, to create employment, to undertake economic development in the country, and to support export growth. Whereas governments are not just concerned with economic development. Economic development has an impact on social development, but when you're talking about social objectives, we're talking about income redistribution strategies that have to be adopted, which target poverty alleviation. There is a case for correcting market failure, for shaping and developing markets so that the issue of asymmetry of information can be addressed, so that the issue of providing a level playing field for MSME growth is available, so that competition can flourish, so that there is reduced market access barriers for any firm to enter or exit the market. And then there are dynamic efficiency objectives also, which promote innovation. So these are some of the objectives that are undertaken whenever we are framing a policy. And through our example, what I'll be sharing with you now is that when we look at international best practices for SME support, the support is available at three levels. At the macro level, that's the policy framework level. At the meso level, that's the institutional development level at the institutional level, and the micro level, which is at the firm and enterprise level. Now, just to share with you, at the macro level, there are countries, we have examples where there have been legislations enacted for supporting SME growth and development. Japan is a classic case of this. So SME development has been on their agenda since the early 50s, and over 25 legislative enactments have been undertaken by the government to support SMEs to meet their needs, to provide them support, to undertake interventions, whether it is related to procurement, whether it is related to addressing the issue of access to finance. So that's at the macro level, that there is an integrated legislative framework. There are countries where only policies have been framed and then implemented. So that's at the macro level. Coming to the institutional level, at the institutional level, an example that is oft cited and which developing countries like to ameliorate and customize to their own countries is the example of the Small Business Administration of the United States of America. Now, they provide, that's an institution, that's the lead institution for SME development that provides counseling, capital, contracting, advocacy, and support to SMEs. Again, established in 1953, through that integrated institutions right down to the state level, to the enterprise level, different support programs are undertaken. So that's why at the bottom of my slide, you can see I've mentioned specialized institutions. SBA is a classic example. Within the developing world, COSGAP Turkey is another very good example of an SME development institution that is providing a very holistic, that has a very holistic approach of supporting SMEs within their country. Coming to the micro level, now, other than having a macroeconomic framework and institutions for SME development that are directly related and providing support to SMEs, certain programs and projects are also undertaken for SMEs. And in the context of Pakistan, I'll be sharing those programs later on in my talk today. These programs provide direct firm level assistance to the micro and small and medium enterprise within the economy. So I mentioned the institutions, and I thought it'd be a good idea if I could just, very briefly share this slide with you in which the kind of services that are provided by different SME development organizations around the world, developed and developing countries, this matrix highlights those areas in which the support for MSMEs is provided by these countries. You have SME Corp Malaysia, you have SMBA Korea, SMRJ Japan, COSGAP Turkey, SBA USA, MSME India, and SMEDA Pakistan. So if you go through this list of some of the things that I have highlighted here, you'll see that there is policy intervention that is undertaken, whether it is in the realm of fiscal policy or monetary policy or investment policy or trade policy across the board, across all governments, across all lead SME development institutions around the world. When it comes to financing, there are countries which are directly involved in through their institutional networks for supporting SME finance, whether it is through specialized institutions, whether it is through risk mitigation mechanisms such as having credit guarantee organizations and funds being run. There is entrepreneurship support that is provided to SMEs to develop, to grow, and to provide livelihood opportunities to SMEs. And there's a connect through in the industry academia linkage area as well. Now, I've tried to share, just to move on, to give you an international context and perspective of the SME sector development around the world. And now, when we look at the world over, when we bring it down to Pakistan, if I were to share the statistics, and you can see them right there in front of you on the screen, 5.2 million SMEs, economic establishments in the country are SMEs. 99% of economic establishments in Pakistan are MSMEs. They contribute about 40% to GDP, contribute 25% to exports. In terms of the labor force, the workforce that is employed in the SMEs is about 72% of non-agriculture workforce is employed within the SME sector. So I thought it'd be a good idea that I'd share with you the journey of MSME development in the country. So when the first 5-year plan was being developed for the country in the 50s and early 60s, SMEs figured into that plan by the government of Pakistan. In its entire planning process, there were certain interventions, certain institutions that were established at that time to support small enterprises. The focus, though, was at that point in time on large enterprises. So there was a small enterprise, and then there were large enterprises that were supported. Moving on, in 2007, the first national SME policy of Pakistan was developed that actually brought SME sector as a distinct, entity onto the map of the country. I've given the definition of SMEs, and in that policy, the SMEs, the enterprise size category, was defined through the parameters of employment size, paid up capital, and annual sales. So any firm that had an employment size of up to 250 is categorized as an MSME, as an SME in Pakistan. However, it is important to note that there are multiple definitions of SMEs, and that is where we are working on currently at arriving at an unanimous, mutually agreeable definition across the institutional network of SME institutions in the country, so that there is no issue when we're talking about SMEs. We all know what kind of firm size we are talking about. So why SME development in Pakistan? Why focus on SME development in Pakistan? SMEs have a lead role to play in economic development because they create jobs at a much lower capital cost. They are labor intensive, they are highly flexible in operation. So just to quote with you, at the bottom of the slide, you can see I've done a comparison between large scale industry and a small scale manufacturing unit, and worked out the average cost per job created. So it costs about $66,000 to create one job within a large scale industry. As opposed to that, the average cost per job created within the SME sector is almost $400. So where you have a large workforce, where you have 220 million people, where you have 63% of your age cohort below the year of 25, that is where your maximum jobs will be created. That is where new firms will be created, providing employment opportunities to other people within the economy. So when we talk about public policies for support of SMEs, there is a network that has to be created. So when the focus is on SMEs and a national policy is being developed, all other policies of the government, the fiscal policy, the monetary policy, the investment policy, the trade policy, are to be aligned with the national SME policy of the country. It is only then, when the macroeconomic policy frameworks are aligned, can we talk and can we actually be able to reach the goal that we're all striving towards, that is SME development. And now, while we may have policies on the left-hand side, there's an entire institutional framework that has to come into action in order to implement those policies. So the federal government, the provincial governments, the private sector has a very important role to play, and so does the academia, so that research-based policy interventions can be designed and implemented. And I thought that I'd share with you the way that we are looking within Pakistan in terms of the public policy support for MSMEs. The objective is to build a resilient enterprise base, focusing on facilitating firm graduation from micro to small to medium to large. So that is the underlying anchor of our policy objective. And how do we get there? As Sony mentioned earlier, initially at the beginning of this talk, that currently we are engaged in designing and revising an SME policy for Pakistan. The strategic trade policy framework that looks at trade aspects, at tariffs that can support SME development is being developed. On to address the access to finance issues of SMEs, we have a national financial inclusion strategy and national SME finance policy in place that has specific targets of enhancing not only the credit being extended to SMEs, but to enhance the number of borrowers as well, that looks at digital aspects of financing. We have an e-commerce policy that is to support MSMEs to get onto e-commerce platforms so that there is a greater market available to them for their products and services. And then the national tariff policy that looks at supporting trade-related initiatives that can support SMEs around the country. To put this in perspective, the pillars of the policy that are currently being looked at and being developed is to define the sector. So there are startups, there is a definition for small enterprises and medium enterprises. Earlier on, the SMEs were defined, if you would recall, there was no disaggregation between the definition of a small firm and a medium-sized firm. The kind of interventions that are required for small enterprises, small enterprises and by medium enterprises vary. So to offset the disadvantage of size, there has to be a bifurcation between the kind of support measures that the government needs to undertake for small enterprises and for medium enterprise. So that's the aspect that we're looking at. There are certain special focus areas which include entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship, and of course, looking at sectors and different clusters of SME development. There is fiscal and monetary space that has to be dedicated for SMEs. There are supply side interventions that are looking at addressing technology issues, human resource development issues, direct hand-holding support through grants, programs, and the likes. And for addressing demand side issues as well, interventions have been designed to provide greater access to markets, providing market support, building on through public procurement as well, and an institutional framework to develop and to take and implement the policy forward. The underlying theme around this is to have a national database of SMEs, because a database is absolutely essential when we're talking not only of statistics, but for designing programs that we would like to undertake for SME development in the country. So as I mentioned, that the SME development process began way back in the 50s, when the planning process in the country was initiated, and there was a mention of small enterprise support in that. There's an entire business support structure, institutional infrastructure available in the country at the federal level, at the provincial level. Then there are specialized financial level institutions. There's a technical training, testing, certification, export promotion agencies that are mandated to work within those specific and particular areas. At the federal level, the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Authority is the lead institution for SME development. It sets the policy framework, it implements the policies. Certain interventions are undertaken by the organization itself, and then other interventions for supporting SMEs are undertaken in collaboration with provincial governments, provincial specialized. And when I say provincial, I'm talking about the state level institutions across the country. So the 4 provinces of Pakistan, there are institutions there that are specialized, and that is who we work with. At the financial level, the state bank is the central bank of the country that sets the financial support system for supporting access to credit. On the technical training side, we have different organizations, NPO being one of them. And on the export promotion side, there's a trade development organization that looks at enhancing trade and providing support for MSME development in the country. Now, I thought that's the framework that I wanted to share before I went on to talk about some of the programs that the government of Pakistan has been undertaking for supporting MSME development in the country. So there is a program by the name of a public sector development program that undertakes development projects across the country. Now, in the case, this example that I'll be sharing with you is related to the public sector development projects that SMEDA, my organization, has been working with over the years. The idea is that the demand-driven interventions are designed to demonstrate new technologies within clusters. And we have had a number of successes when we have adopted this strategy for supporting SMEs in Pakistan. These projects are planned in close consultation with the private sector and in fact are implemented in partnership with the private sector. So other than public sector providing its funding support, private sector also provides its funding support and its management support as well. Through the years, SMEDA has executed 33 projects over a time period of 14 years. And what has happened is that we have been able to mobilize private sector investment through demonstration of new technologies in these projects. The key projects that I'll be sharing with you as examples are the agro-food processing facilities at Multan, a sports industries development center at Sialkot, which is known for its sporting goods, and a honey processing and packaging facility at Swat. Now, the AFP, just to give you this, to set the context, Multan is a region to the south of the province of Punjab that is very famous for its mangoes. And other than table quality mangoes, there was a lot of wastage of mangoes. Over 40% of mangoes were wasted. So a fruit processing and pulping facility was set up in this particular area for providing grading, packaging, and storage of fruit. Now, this is an ISO certified facility, and what happened was, due to establishment of this particular facility, we have had private sector set up financially viable projects within the same area. And that was particularly the focus of this federal government funded public sector development program, that this makes business sense to demonstrate new technology to SMEs and to mobilize private sector investment. Similarly, in the sports industries development center is another example in which thermomolded balls are being developed that are used in these sporting events around the world, whether it's the World Cup, football, or the Champions League. So balls are being manufactured here. It has a high quality testing laboratory facility as well, and manpower training is also provided at this facility. And the third example is that of the honey processing facility. Again, a honey filtration and packaging facility was set up in the area of Swat, which is very rich in honey production. There was no processing facility earlier on at that location, so this facility was set up. And now what beekeepers do is they bring in their honey, it is processed, it is packaged, and it is ready for exports as well. So at the cluster level or at the institutional support level, a common machinery pool was provided to a cluster where there was a large number of SMEs that have been able to benefit from the processing facilities that have been made available to them through this particular intervention. Moving on, at the firm level, so SMEDA has had the experience of working with experts from Japan, from other countries as well, in which the Japanese team of experts and the Pakistani team that is trained and becomes, the lead in these particular areas has been working at providing firm level support in the areas of energy efficiency, in productivity and quality. And as an outcome of this work, best practice guidelines and models have also been developed. So facilitation has been provided within the energy efficiency area in terms of lighting, cooling systems, motor and pumps, the way business is done. And what has happened is that these have resulted in energy savings of over 150 million kilowatt hour per annum. That's 15 megawatt per annum, and there's been a reduction in CO2 emissions as well. 170 companies have been provided this direct hand-holding support. Similarly, in the area of productivity and quality, through improvements in layout designs, through working in the area of travel distance, inducing labor efficiency and reduction in rejection rates of certain products being developed in manufacturing facilities has resulted and has had an impact in terms of process time being reduced, the reduction rates being reduced, the labor being properly utilized. And this support facility has been provided to over 330 companies in the country. And as an outcome, as lessons learned from the interventions at the firm level that were undertaken through these programs and projects, best practice manuals on energy efficiency, on productivity improvement, on how to conduct energy audits has been made available to businesses, to clusters at large across various sectors. This is a very simple example, and actually I really like this one because it's very self-explanatory. So if you look at this on your left-hand side, you'll see that there is improper stacking of cones that are to be used in a manufacturing process that results in scratches and dents and a lot of rejection. On the right side, you'll see just after putting them in proper crates and just stacking them properly, the defect rate has been reduced approximately 1 from 7. That's an 87% reduction rate. So that's how product quality and competitiveness and productivity can be increased. So this example is a classic example of a typical SME located in a city which is famous for its light engineering products in Pakistan. Here's another example that I'd like to share at the firm level. So you see a drill right there. So the purpose of this drill was 3 holes had to be drilled into a metal plate. So what the labor had to do was to take off the bit because the size of each hole was very different from the other. So in order to do that, when you were taking off, the drill bit had to be changed. There was time involved. There was, it took a long time. There was line balance efficiency that was hampered. Instead of that, a progressive drill was developed with different diameter of holes that had to be drilled through it, which resulted in improvement in daily production from 240 pieces after this one drill bit that could drill 3 holes in this metal plate of a production process. It resulted in 75% of improvement. Overall, the productivity improved by 75%. The lead time was reduced from 30 days to 12 days. That's a 60% improvement. The setup time was reduced from 35 minutes to 15 minutes because you didn't have to really change the drill bit every time that a different sized hole had to be drilled. The work in process inventory went down to 3 from 7, a 60% improvement. The line balance efficiency improved from 61.5% to 85.7%. That's a 40% efficiency. So overall, through a very small intervention, there was a productivity improvement of 75%. Coming to another example in which, so I shared some manufacturing support that was provided at the firm level for productivity enhancement. Now, this is an example of a program that was funded through the Multi-Donor Trust Fund project that provides support to SMEs, in which grants were provided to SMEs with a target of reaching out to 800 SMEs. 1,700 SMEs were supported through this program, and this program won the 3rd position in a competition that was held in the United States of America for providing direct hand-holding support to SMEs. Now, coming to the way forward, where we are, I wanted to share those examples. Perhaps I've gone in a little bit of more detail than I was supposed to, and looking at the time also, I just saw it. But just to wrap up, the way forward here for us, for the framework of SME development, is that there are challenges that I spoke of. There is a gap between a domestic value chain of SMEs. Our idea is to plug in that gap so that enhanced value can be captured and there can be greater integration in the local and into the global value chain of SME sector development. The sector development in Pakistan, the way we see it, SME sector development is central to economic development of the country, in which the focus is on exports, enterprises, and creating jobs. And there are multiple interventions that can be undertaken within this sector, whether it is through adopting a sectoral or a cluster-based approach, whether it is providing credit through credit guarantee mechanisms, whether it is building markets through B2B platforms. So there's an entire framework that we have developed for supporting SMEs in Pakistan. And I think what is very important for us for our partner countries around Asia, around Southeast Asia, the APO member countries, is some of the lessons that we have learned is that whenever there is integration and coordination of policy support, we see results. And the ease of doing business is one such an example for Pakistan. Very recently, in the 2020, from a rank of 136, we've jumped to a rank of 108. Targeted demand-driven interventions will always reap results. In our case, demonstration projects have been able to mobilize private sector investment, and then firm-level direct assistance, whether it is through grants programs, whether it is technical support for productivity improvement and energy efficiency. One example is the technological support that was provided through some of the interventions undertaken by SMEDA have resulted in a firm exporting fuel tanks to Vietnam Suzuki. So that's an example of productivity improvement and hand-holding support where new enterprises can be created through providing them relevant information. So I hope what I have shared with you will be of use to other APO member countries as well. Thank you.
So really appreciate your sharing, Nadia. So allow me please now to take the question from the viewers. The first question from Nathan Walker is basically asking about what kind of capacity building are you carrying out for those SMEs, that is supported by, your agency or your authority in this regard.
Okay.
I think he's referring to the case of Pakistan, of course.
Yes. Okay. So when we come to capacity building, so I'll begin with sharing some of the work that Pakistan and my institution, SMEDA, is undertaking. So we work in the area of building management capacity. We work in the area of supporting technical capacity of firms. The example that I shared with you is actually a part of the technical capacity building program that we undertake. When it comes to management practices, we have an entire training calendar that is developed at the beginning of the year. A training need assessment, a capacity building assessment exercise is carried out. An entire plan is developed around that, depending on the needs of the SMEs. This is done in consultation with the private sector through different chambers of commerce and business support organizations. And then we engage experts to deliver these training programs. So that's when we're focusing on SME sector and on building the capacity of SMEs through different programs. There are other institutions within the SME space that also work within the area of training. Some of the information and training programs is undertaken by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan on how to bring the informal sector into formal sector and what kind of support is required. Similarly, at the technical level, there is an entire network of technical, educational, and vocational training centers around the country that provide that kind of support.
All right, thank you. Second question is from Daniel Kim. He's asking about what is the biggest challenge in helping to finance for the SMEs in Pakistan?
I think one of the biggest challenge in terms of helping finance SMEs in Pakistan is the lack of collateral. Mm-hmm. So to address that lack of collateral, there are a number of risk mitigation mechanisms that are put in place around the world. Even in Pakistan, the State Bank of Pakistan piloted a project by the name of a credit guarantee fund, which is now being graduated to a credit guarantee company so that collateral deficient SMEs can be supported. So I would say that it is collateral. The other issue is asymmetry of information also from the SME side and the bankability of an SME side. So there are capacity issues on the SME side also in terms of approaching a commercial lending institution for obtaining finance.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me perhaps bring you another, sort of dimension of question, which is about the policy itself. As perhaps you are aware that many governments around the world, particularly in developing countries, they have implemented a sort of a policy mix for their SMEs. In the sense where they try to achieve a mix of competitiveness and social policy objective in their SMEs policy. So how about the practice there in Pakistan? That's one. Second is this really a good approach? Because as you can see that there are potential drawback that this kind of approach can bring, which is perhaps the two objective of the policy mix is somehow they may contradict each other. Your view on this, please.
That's a very good question, actually. And we often grapple with it when we're, looking at what kind of a policy intervention that we have to, we should go with in terms of bringing these two objectives together. I think my personal view is that when we look at the macroeconomic objectives and when we look at the social objectives, on the face of it, or in the strictest of sense, they may not seem to converge. But I think when we design policy interventions where we're talking about economic development, it will have a trickle down in achieving social objectives as well. And if your policy is anchored into regional endowments, where you're talking about redistribution of the fruits of economic development and building upon a regional endowment, that's where your social objectives will also be met. So I think there is a convergence between the two. That is what I personally think.
Thank you for that. Another question. This is something that's more relevant to the current situation. This is a question from Jisuk Lee. What is it the countermeasure being applied there in Pakistan against this COVID-19 pandemic?
Right, that's a very pertinent question and very timely as well. For COVID-19, the government of Pakistan has come up with a policy package, and I'll just be sharing some of the work that has been done for supporting firms that are under distress. The approach that is being adopted is to first support these firms, not to close down. So to restart, and so that's there, and then to restart once businesses start taking off and once the economic activity starts gaining strength. So in this regard, there have been different programs that have been developed for supporting SMEs on the financing side. There has been restructuring of loans through the state bank. These schemes have been launched. There is a wage support program that has been launched for MSMEs. There is a daily wages support program, which is pro-poor, actually, to support the daily wagers that might be laid off from work. That's another program that's mostly for social safety, as part of the social safety program that is being currently executed by the government of Pakistan. There are refinance schemes that have been launched. There is a utility subsidy on the electricity that has been provided by the government of Pakistan for SMEs in the country, and that's a huge support. I would say, in terms of payment of electricity bills for 3 months for small and medium enterprises has been provided by the government. So in terms of providing in the fiscal side as well, there is taxation support that has been provided. There has been certain incentives being announced for various sectors, construction sector being one of them. So there's a host of projects and of interventions that have been undertaken for supporting SMEs.
If I may continue the same with the same questions. So with regard to the informality of SMEs, basically mostly perhaps in the nature, in many situations, in many countries, they are informal. When you implement that those policies in dealing with the impact of the COVID-19, so how do you manage it? They are informal, but in the same way, the government needs to, or the authority needs to get something, resources, financial support to them. How do you deal with this?
That's a very good question. And if you recall, I mentioned that having a database of SMEs is absolutely essential, because that is not only important for targeting purposes, but also for designing, for reaching out to those SMEs that require the kind of support that you just mentioned. So in the programs that the current government is running in terms of the wage support program, that's a social safety, that's a self-declaration program in which a person self-declares that I am a daily wager. He provides essential information that is collected, verified, and then that support is provided to that individual. When it comes to the electricity support program, so the electricity connections of that is part of the documentation in the country, that there is documented number of commercial and industrial users of electricity. So that data set has been used in this instance for identifying small and medium firms are below a certain threshold of utilization of energy, of electricity, has been used to identify firms for that are being subsidized, that are being provided support by the government of Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that explanation. So allow me now to take another question from Mr. Carlos Rodriguez. Is pointing out into the regulation side on the SMEs, particularly in Pakistan. So how is it the situation there with regard to startup, for example? Is regulations actually helping to stimulate startups to grow, or because in many cases sometimes the regulation is the blocking factor? How is it now, this situation there? This is from Mr. Carlos Rodriguez.
Good question, Carlos. The startup scene in Pakistan, the way the term is used is mostly related to high tech firms that are starting up, and we're not talking about very traditional businesses. Now, in order to support such firms, an entire entrepreneurial ecosystem has to be built, and that's what the government is also focusing on. So a sandbox has been launched by the SECP, the Securities and Exchange Commission of the country, that can support startups, especially in the area of technology. Gradually, regulations are being eased so that instead of serving as an impediment to growth, or as an impediment for firms to come into and start doing business, they are provided support. There are provided incubation and acceleration facilities, so that hand-holding is available also, and the regulatory side is also taken care of. At this point in time, if you talk about an entrepreneurship policy, we don't have an entrepreneurship policy, but that's what we're looking at addressing through the SME policy, with a special focus on entrepreneurship development that looks at the regulations, the licensing side, so that it does not deter people from starting their own businesses.
Thank you for that. Another question, perhaps the last two questions that I have. There are plenty more, but for the sake of the time, so I'm afraid that I wouldn't be able to take all those questions. This is from Akira Suzuki. So with regard to FDI, for indirect investments for SME in Pakistan, how is it the strategy of the government, of Pakistan to attract FDIs and address it to SME sector there? Nadia?
Okay. So when it comes to FDI, the government of strategy, the lead institution in this regard is the Board of Investment, and a sectoral strategy has been developed. That's the sectoral approach has been developed. The investment strategy is available. There are certain sectors, there are certain high growth, high potential sectors that are identified. Those include agro-food processing. Being an agrarian country, agro-food processing is one specific area that there is potential for growth, and that is where we are also focusing on. Horticulture, ICT is another very lucrative and growing area of support. And bringing this investment to the SMEs, that's where the role of SMEDA also comes in. So we have identified potential opportunities for attracting investment into different projects across the country based on regional endowments. This information is available in the form of pre-feasibility studies that are available with the organization, with SMEDA, and on our website and in our offices for supporting SMEs and to attract investment in particular sectors. They range from related to agriculture to horticulture, agro-food processing. You're talking about within the manufacturing sector, there's leather. In the services sector, you're talking about the education sector, the health sector, the ICT, the information communication technology. So all this information in terms of how and what needs to be done and where are the potential areas for investment are available, readily available to attract foreign direct investment in the country and specifically to the SME sector.
So another question, this is related with the production process, which day by day becoming like more complex and interconnected. This applies perhaps not only for SMEs, but also for any companies or manufacturing industry, for example. So what would be the best policy response for this, particularly for SMEs?
I think the best policy response for this is digitization and automation. That's where we're working at. That's where we've seen results. In the last year, there's been a 17% growth in the internet penetration in the country. And if you look at the statistics, I'm sure this unfortunate COVID situation since February till now, probably there has been the fastest growth in terms of onboarding of businesses on e-commerce platforms and also adoption because of labor-related issues in the production process also. So automation, digitization is the answer.
All right, I think we still have time for one more question, which perhaps the last question that I have. This is with regard to, as you mentioned also in your presentation, that integrating the operation of SMEs with global value chain is one of the way to increase or to enhance productivity. So I think, a lot of efforts, has been currently, being tried by many governments or even private sector to do just this, but it's not really easy. What are, do you think, the prerequisites so this kind of approach or strategy can be successful?
I think your trade policy, the trade liberalization is very important here. Big geography matters when we talk about integrating into global value chain, and I think location of a country within the overall framework of the way the global value chains are configured and within a particular country itself. So when I say big geography and small geography, by small geography I mean is the cluster location, the specialized zones that can be created within a country to attract investment and for firms to integrate into global value chains. That's another area that I think is very important. The other thing is the investment incentives that are offered by a particular country have an important role to play for integrating into global value chain. Manufacturing competitiveness, of course, is again extremely important, and in fact this is more of a chicken and egg situation, because when you look at literature, you have you will find evidence that supports that integrating into global value chains increases investment in the host country and vice versa. So, this is an area that has to be looked into. And integration, of course, requires investment in tangible and intangible assets. So for integration into global value chains, the right kind of policy framework in terms of trade liberalization and ease and reduction in transportation costs in the logistical network that is available is very important.
All right, I'm afraid that this is the end of our talk today. I would like to thank the viewers for the engagement. So if you still have comments or questions, please leave them on our YouTube channel, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we could. I'm sure that Nadia will be very happy to provide us with the answer. I would like also to express our gratitude to Nadia for your sharing time, for sharing your time and experience with us. And to all viewers, if you like to receive update on the future P-Talk or any other updates related to APO, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thanks to you, Nadia, and all the viewers, wishing everyone to stay safe and productive. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Sony and APO. Thank you.